So, Brian, this, as I said to you off air, this has been an absolute honor. I think I've been watching your videos for the entirety time I've been in the industry. And I've probably spent more evenings watching your videos interpreting lab work than I probably have watched anything else. So this is an absolute...
Sorry to hear that.
I don't consider it a waste of time at all. I've absolutely loved it. So it's an absolute pleasure. For people that don't know you, how would you describe who Bryan Walsh is?
Oh, I'm supposed to describe myself? Well, I'm not great at that, I'll tell you. So I just gave you some background, I guess. This is cliche. I've always been interested in health. I remember as a kid, like I would send cash in the mail to order, exercise or nutrition stuff before I was driving, 8 years old. I just have always been interested in it. And that translated a little bit later. I was actually sort of my career, if you will, was to be a teacher. And in the process of doing that, I started reading more formally about health, I guess you could say. And I became healthier. I didn't know I was unhealthy. It was in college, you eat pizza and drink beer. And I didn't know how bad I was until I started, eating better and exercising again more formally. And that really kind of triggered it for me. So I ended up becoming a fitness professional. That's how it all started. And this was, I don't know the age of some of your listeners, but this was so long ago. Charles Poliquin BioSig hadn't even been created yet. He was writing for a now defunct magazine called Muscle Media, which again, most people don't even know about.
I remember Muscle Media.
Yeah, Bill Phillips, his saying HMB was like DECA, all that. That was that time. Paul Chek, all he did was Swiss balls, that kind of stuff. So then that was the pill, right? So I got into the fitness industry, but that automatically, even back then, led to just a profound interest in nutrition because it goes together. It goes hand in hand. And so that all then eventually led to, and you know how that goes, the rabbit holes. Back in the day, I can't say it was pre-internet, but the internet wasn't what it was now. And so you just kind of go after books on everything, anything that was like health related at that point. Maybe it was something weird like essential oils, but, anything that was under the umbrella of health. And then that led me to become a naturopath. And here in the U.S., you're basically considered a physician in states that license. And that was the umbrella, right? So we learned everything regarding health. It was not only diet, exercise, and nutrition, but acupuncture, Chinese medicine, and really went deeply into the sciences with this stuff. So come out of that. The short version is, as with most degrees or certificates, you realize that going into it, you were really excited, but then coming out of it, you didn't learn what you really thought you were going to learn. And realized that I knew a lot less than I thought I did. And so, and I had patients coming to me. Well, I'll tell you the story because I think we're going to talk about this. I would have a patient give me their blood work. And I can say this now. I was looking at it, pretending that I knew what I was doing, like nodding, like, yep, okay. In my head, I'm like, I have no clue what any of that. You could have turned it upside down and I didn't know what it was. And I was like, man, I need to learn labs. This is like fundamental. And so then it went on this long foray of just self-teaching, man, like legitimately biochemistry textbooks, physiology textbooks. Didn't listen to anybody else because I think somewhere in my head I knew that the industry is riddled with a lot of misinformation, a lot of dogma, ego, especially bias. And because of that, I just taught myself. And at some point, things clicked and they came together. And I realized I did know what I was doing now. I was able to help people in practice in a way that I hadn't been able to before. I met my wife in school too. And, I would share these things I was learning with her, and we're good at it. And it was fun and enjoyable, and we weren't getting too tripped up over a weird case or a weird patient. So that's about it, I guess. I mean, in terms of who I am now, I love, listen, if you really want to know, first in my life is God, then my wife, then my kids. And then all this other stuff is pretty fun. Figuring out the body, how it works. Yeah. I absolutely believe we know a lot less than we think we do about the body. And so never claim, any kind of like, well, this is how the body works. It's usually, well, this is how we think that it works. I mean, the sliding filament theory, it's just a theory, which they still haven't even proven. Something as fundamental as that, it's still a theory. It's not a law. They haven't put that into stone yet. So that's it. I just love God, love my wife, love my family, and this health stuff has been a part of me since I was young. Combine that with teaching, which is what I do, and I have a happy little life.
There's so much I love about that. The first and a completely off-topic thing, as a man who is, I would call myself a reluctant atheist, in the sense that I don't believe, but I'm incredibly envious of anyone that does believe. So I love hearing that. But I also love the fact that you said that we know as much less about the body than we think we do. We're in a world where the Stitch incoming reaction video on Instagram is becoming more popular than ever, and actually, we need to pull back from this dogma because people really, really, really don't know enough. What was it that made you go down the nutrition route? You mentioned Charles Poliquin, and you mentioned obviously Paul Chek, and obviously Chek went much more down the nutrition route, although he has some great information on training. Charles leaned into the training route. What made you pick the nutrition path over the training route?
Well, a couple of things, I guess. And like Ian King at the time, he was, all these same guys. I think because at the time, so I got into the exercise bit, muscle strength, fat loss, athletics, and I was really digging the orthopedic part of that too. Not just wanting to have people drop some weight, but actually have them feel better and be healthier. And I think it was that thing. If you think about that, so fat loss is cool, strength is cool, looking good is cool, but I was really into having people feel better. And exercise is a very, very, very small part of that feeling better. And, when you look at the impacts of nutrition on that feeling better part, it is fundamental. There's so much evidence. I mean, there's empirical evidence, there's scientific evidence, it's more than, and I hate to say it, it's true, but when you look at the literature, it more than exercise has greater physiological effects than does exercise. I have a list going of like 100, I'm working on almost 200 reasons, physiological reasons to exercise, like individual things. So we have to move. We're designed to move. If we don't, things fall apart and we become unhealthy. But in reality, when it really boils down to it, if you had to choose one or the other, eat healthy or move more, eating healthy will have greater physiological benefits, longevity, health, and all those things. The one thing I just wanted to go back to really quickly to make the point about that we know a lot less than we think we do. So I'm a believer that history tends to repeat itself. And I don't know why this doesn't hit more in audiences when I say this, but all you need to do is go back 50 years, 100 years, 300 years, and look at what they were doing or believed to be true of the body and how it worked at the time. And at the time, they believed wholeheartedly that that's how the body worked and that's how things were impacted by a variety of things in the environment. Like mercury was used therapeutically, for example. It's so many things. And then the question is, we can look back and say, boy, taking smoke and blowing it up someone's rear end in order to revive them if they almost drowned, like that's stupid. And we're like, but now we know. Oh, now we know so much more. We do know more, but what's to say that in 50 years from now, they're not going to look at what we're doing and be like, man, those are some dumb blokes back then. And so we have this sense of superiority, like, well, look at our science. That's what they said back then too. They said, look at our science compared to the past. Every time we learn more, but I still submit, we know a lot less than we think we do when it comes to genes and how it relates to health, the microbiome, the nervous system, the immune system. So really, we're just do the best we can with the tools that we have. So I just wanted to touch upon that because it's true of exercise too. I mean, if you go in the history of exercise, I got into this before kettlebells. Nobody even knew what a kettlebell was here in the States. And all the different theories of how to build muscle, get stronger. All these studies coming out now that it doesn't have to, in the exercise realm. I'm sure you probably saw him. What was that guy, Schofield? I think it was, where it's not the number of reps, it's the like proximity to failure. So you can have somebody do, 30% of their 1RM and get the same hypertrophy benefits that we've been saying for years. You need to do 8 to 12 reps or whatever.
Yeah.
And we're like, oh gosh, what do you know? We're wrong about that too. So anyhow, just wanted to cover that.
I think that's hugely important. And one of the things I often teach my students is sound principles before sound bites. And I think you echo that in your own story of teaching yourself everything you knew about physiology and how it works as far as we know it in this realm. Because now when you look at literature, it's like, look, I'm going to of course use literature to see what is statistically significant, but my experience will tell me what's relevant for the person. A great example of this is where I think there are limitations is the more information we're learning about toxins and microplastics and things like this, it's like, yes, you might see a study that says this toxin doesn't have any impact on human health, but we're not looking at the accumulation of toxins, and we can't study that. If we looked at a study that says, how do all of these affect us, it'd be probably a pretty bad study because you won't control for those variables. And I certainly see that something that 5 to 10 years down the line, we were going, I can't believe we didn't think about this sooner.
Oh, dude, it's all the time. We do that as a parent. You do that as a spouse. You do that as a practitioner. I remember back when I was a trainer and I didn't learn, it was like magazines, that's where you start out. I was having people doing the hanging leg raises, and then you learn about the psoas and like hyperlordosis. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I thought it was a low ab exercise. It was a psoas exercise. I'm creating all this orthopedic problems in people. Like, what a moron. How many times have we done that? We look back, we're like, geez, I believe that. I told people to eat, 6 meals a day to balance glucose. And the science is very clear. That's a super bad idea. Intermittent fasting, skipping breakfast, super bad idea, but sounded good at the time. Like we're wrong more than we're right. So as long as, but here's the deal. Because then people hear that and they're like, well, why bother? And you bother because you approach it with humility to say, like, this seems to be the best idea at the time. And as long as you're using your brain and critically evaluating things, you might make mistakes, and we all will, but at least you're giving it a good shot, and if you're like you said, and not the sound bite kind of stuff, because that's garbage. So anyhow, I think the humility part is just like knowing that we're doing the best we can with the amount of information that we have. And that might change. Some things won't, we have a heart, pretty solid on that. But in terms of its functions, will definitely change. Adipose tissue used to just be this storage thing. Now it's an organ, its own individual organ. Interstitial fluid they're discussing that as being its own unique, distinct organ by itself. I crack up when they'll find a new muscle. Like that little, instead of the quadriceps, there's that little itty bitty thing that kind of was like a quadricep, but then there's quinticeps. And like, if we're finding new body parts, do you think we like really nailed down hormones? And I always tell people, that's like going into your glove box in your car and finding something in there that you're like, how long has this been in here for? This has been in here for years, or some fork or some like piece of candy or something. That's what we're doing in the body. We're finding new body parts. We have been dissecting the body for over 100 years. Prior to that, it was illegal, but we've been doing it for kind of a long time. And we're still identifying new parts. If you're finding new tools in your toolbox that you never knew was there, how well do you think how well do we really nail down the microbiome, So
there's so many levels to that as well, right? Because for someone that's been in the game as long as you have, that is a message to stay humble and keep exploring. But for a newer coach who's overwhelmed by all this, or thinks he has an ego and thinks he knows it all, it's sort of like, okay, you're not as bad as you think you are. Look, there's a reason you have imposter syndrome. This stuff's difficult. And
1,000%. This
is the reason why you should go and invest and learn and immerse yourself into this, because we don't know as much, So going into like, in particular, something that I think that a lot of the coaches listening to this will start learning about. And for myself, my introduction for you was one of your products was Fat Is Not Your Fault. And why weight loss plateaus might not just be calories in versus calories out. And we seem to have two tribes, I think, in the nutrition space. We have the calories only people, and we have the hormones only people. The hormones only people sometimes do not get results because they don't consider calories. And the calories only people often destroy people's health because they're only thinking about calories, and they push people into a hole. So Like, how often, in your opinion, with your understanding of this, is a weight loss plateau deeper than calories in versus calories out? And where do these two tribes intersect for you?
It's funny that you say that. So I probably shouldn't say this because it's not available, but I'm sitting on right now, and I say this with humility. Well, I'll give background. I've been in this space for a long time. Fat is not your fault. I've been in and around fat loss, fitness, nutrition for a long time. Other than fat is not your fault, I never came out with any kind of weight loss program. It's been done. I mean, look at all the books on it, and it's such a busy space. I'm sitting on right now. I haven't recorded it yet, and I'm saying this with humility, what I believe is the most comprehensive weight loss information program that anybody could ever watch. And the reason why I say that is because I've gone into all the literature, created kind of this, I don't know how to say it, this chart kind of thing, just looking at all those pieces. And I'll answer your question in a second, because there are answers out there when it comes to this stuff. So, and I don't know when I'll release that at all, but it's mind blowing. It blows my own mind, and I made it. I'm just. But I'm looking at this, and it's like the last weight loss course you'll need. It's awesome. Now, I say all that to say I can speak to your question because I've just been looking at those very things. First and foremost, calories in, calories out. Like that, you have to, in order to lose weight, you have to create a calorie deficit. Period. End of story. That's all there is to it. And exercise is not a great way to do that by itself. You can, but you need a lot more exercise in order to actually do that. There's some interesting studies on that. That said, there are also some really interesting papers, some of them quite old actually, when they could evaluate these things a little bit better. But they will take, for example, a number of women that report having a hard time losing weight. They will, and this is, again, they don't do this very often, but they'll isolate all of them. They'll bring them all into whatever little study center they have or something. And they'll determine their things like their BMR. They will put them on an eating schedule that they can't budge on. They only eat what they're given. And lo and behold, the majority will lose weight, indicating that they were having a hard time losing weight, probably because they weren't creating enough of a calorie deficit. So few wouldn't lose any weight. And then even a few or less, a very, very small percentage, would actually gain weight. And what they would also do in these papers is find out that their BMR was lower than what was calculated in the first place. And these are some older papers. And the suggestion is there is a hormonal component to it. There is, if somebody has created a deficit, like a serious deficit for too long, I think intermittent fasting, what anybody can argue with me if they want about this. I think it is a bad idea metabolically, a really bad idea. I have zero human examples of this, but I think the body adapts is what it really boils down to. So for whatever reason, whether it's, intermittent fasting or it's hormonal or periods of extreme dieting. Well, listen, I have a half dozen paper on how much thyroid is impacted by a calorie deficit. Carbohydrates. This is a great one. You lower your carbohydrates, your thyroid goes down. It does. And there's papers on this too. So, and thyroid does have a fairly potent role in terms of one's basal metabolic rate, though there's other things. Thyroid sort of sensitizes epinephrine, if you want to put it that way, which clearly has metabolic effects to it. So it's funny when there's a camp because they're usually both right, but then they argue how right they are about themselves. And so and here, this is, and me, I hate protocols. I think protocols are a waste of time. I think that, because there'll be people that don't get well on that protocol and then you're stuck because you can't think. So if you are to calculate somebody's BMR and you do so and you get their calories, what you think is a deficit, and they're moving around a little bit and they don't lose weight, that too is legitimate, right? Because some people say, well, you're eating more, and that's a piece too, underreporting. what people are eating, and extra calories in foods that are kind of hidden. There's just a lot to it. And so, if there's any trainers that are trying to have people lose weight and they're some people just aren't, you might have to look at hormones, which means that, and I think this is the point of this podcast, or at least at some point it was to look at some labs. I think that's in the purview of fitness professionals, and I can talk more about that. But if they're not losing weight on your program, they're based on the calories that they're eating, or they're reporting that they're eating, and they are being accurate, it's not about more exercise at that point. It's probably something metabolic. So both camps are right, and both camps are wrong in the sense that there's so many factors that play at this. Listen, just to put it another way, there's papers done on identical twins that they'll have them, again, like super isolated, supervise the entire study, and on the same calorie level, on the same exercise program, and one twin will lose more than the other twin. I mean, you can't tell me at that point that there's not some individuality to these things as well.
Yes, I completely agree with this, and I think it's the second time I've used this analogy in a podcast episode with an American today. So I apologies that my knowledge of American football will not be as good as probably yours is. But I always talk about this as almost like, if you think of your coach in an American football team being like your hypothalamus, he'll come up with a game plan. He'll talk to his quarterback, the pituitary, and he will throw balls to his wide receivers and his halfbacks. If the coach is bogged down by the media, if the quarterback's throwing arms a little bit off, if the wide receivers and halfbacks are running wrong lines, they will find it hard to beat teams they should have beaten because they're not performing well. Mm-hmm. In the same way that when I hear a coach talk about BMR as just coma calories, and I'm like, there is so much within this. We have our liver, we have our thyroid, we have our HPA axis, we have a number of things that may influence this thing. So like, go on.
I was going to say, if I can take it further, because that's, your question was calories versus hormones, but that's also, there's other things. I mean, so you can look at, specific gut bacteria are related to, appetite. I mean, lipopolysaccharides and inflammation and weight loss. And then, this is too deep to talk to here, but you can have two people with the exact same BMI, body fat percentage, or however you want to measure it. And one person actually has, it's kind of a scientific word, but like sick, toxic fat, and the other one doesn't. And that's actually measurable on a lab. It goes in too deep to talk about here. But there are some people that their fat is healthy, and there's some people that it's not. And the stuff that the one it's not is producing and releasing into the body, and inflammation. I hate inflammation as a term. It's so overused. It doesn't really mean much. It's kind of like, so I was back in the exercise day, functional exercise was the term that was just barely coming out. So like, standing on a wobble board, one-handed, doing some cable thing. That was a quote unquote functional exercise. Over time, it lost its meaning. Everything was functional exercise, right? Inflammation has lost its meaning. What really is inflammation? Acute, chronic, systemic, localized. But so it's not just hormones. There's glucose regulation. There's and things associated with that metabolically. There's the health of the gut. There's the immune system is involved. I mentioned lipopolysaccharides. There's underlying hidden subclinical infections. There's so many pieces to this, which shouldn't make somebody afraid and like, how can I? But more excited. Like, cool, I get to look into all these different things and figure this out. So
I love that. When it like ending on that weight loss plateau thing before we dive into health and labs. So if someone's got a client right now and they're not losing weight and they're banging their head against the wall, and we know there is maybe a misreporting thing, maybe they're not in a big deficit thing, and there may be some of these deeper factors. If you had that client, what would be sort of like your order of importance? What would you be looking at as almost like a tick list to see, where do I start looking at with this person?
Mm-hmm. So if I was that fitness, if you just go way back to when I was, a smaller version of myself, or younger, maybe I should say, I'm much smaller. I would, as a fitness professional only, and that's like knowing what I know now, could give this advice to him back then, would be learn how to read a blood chemistry test. Because there's no other test that exists anywhere on the planet that will tell you more aspects of somebody's physiology than a super inexpensive blood chemistry test. It's signs and symptoms are great, but that just gives you some ideas of where to go. I hate all these trackers that we have nowadays. I feel like it's taken our eye off the ball, and how are you sleeping? And it actually, well, here's an example is, let's say you have a sleep tracker. You wake up and you're like, man, I feel great. That was a great night of sleep. You look at your sleep tracker and it says you had a horrible night of sleep. And you're like, well, maybe I did. Maybe I don't feel as good as I thought I did. So I think it messes us up, and we're focusing on personally, I think we're focusing on the wrong things. So that's what I would do, because when you say order of importance, there is no order of importance, in the sense that there is no hierarchy that I'm comfortable saying. And that's, again, having looked at, I can't tell you how many papers, this weight loss course that I've built. I can't even tell you how many papers in this thing, man. It's unreal. I cannot put a hierarchy on, well, your thyroid's more important than cortisol, which is more important than glucose regulation, which is more important than your sex hormones, which is more important than your gut health, which is more important than your detoxification capacity. I will tell you that those are all things to consider in somebody. And I think I probably just rambled off 6 things. You can take 6 people who are all struggling in weight loss, and each one might have one of those different things going on. So I can't say, well, consider toxins. Yes. If somebody has exposure and the obesogens and how they can wreck your metabolism, but it's not going to be in everybody. I'll just toss out, there's also the mental emotional component. One of my favorite topics, hands down, beyond anything below the neck, biochemistry, physiology, which, you can talk about for hours all day long, is somebody, I don't like to use a specific term, but essentially like your purpose, knowing why you're here. And I'm talking about knowing why you're here. Like you wake up in the morning and you know why you're here on this planet and what you're doing. And I will tell you, more than any time in human history that I can tell, that's just completely lacking. And I bring that up because there are actually, once again, papers showing that, and this is a whole topic by itself, love this topic, that if you feel connected, if you have a purpose and you feel connected in some way, that your physiology is different than somebody that feels disconnected and has no purpose. That there's a higher level of baseline inflammation, for example, that your immune system, they've looked at white blood cells, natural killer cells, it's different in people. You respond differently to an inflammatory insult. Just to make this completely blow your mind, is a couple papers. One looked at the antibody production response in college students who felt lonely or not. And the ones who felt lonely didn't make as much antibodies to the vaccine as the ones who felt more connected. Like the implications of that, dude, are beyond what we can even comprehend. Another one, you're probably familiar with lipopolysaccharides, or, basically like this sort of inflammatory thing that gram-negative bacteria make. And because they're so inflammatory, for over 100 years, researchers have been using these to stimulate an inflammatory response in people in an experimental design, right? People that are more lonely have a more robust, hyperactive immune response when injected with lipopolysaccharides than do people who have more of a purpose and feel more connected. So you can't tell me, and there's no studies on this that I've seen, but you can't tell me that that's not going to impact somebody's metabolic rate, somebody's ability to lose fat, build muscle, their hormone levels. So you can look at hormones, you can look at toxins, you can look at the gut, but if someone doesn't even know why the heck they're here in the first place, if they don't feel connected or have some kind of tribe that they're a part of, and I'm not talking about lying to yourself. Oh, sure, I have my Facebook tribe. Bull. I'm talking about people that you would almost die for, and in reverse, they would probably do the same for you. They would have your back in a way that when things went real south, they were there for you. Who do we really have like that? And in terms of your purpose, when you wake up in the morning, it's I wonder what I'm going to do today. Versus and it's not a to-do list. It's not, it's what are you serving? I mean by that?
A calling, yeah.
Yeah, call it a calling. And I'm going to tell you, there's most people, if really pressed, don't have one. And so I say all that to say, super long-winded way of answering your question. There is no hierarchy. You got to take each person individually. And I know people like protocols, right? Like, let me get the checklist. So this person's not losing weight. Let me look at their gut. Then let's look at their toxins. Not their toxins. Let's look at their glucose. It doesn't work that way. I hate to say it, but it doesn't. This goes back to we know less than we think that we do. You got to look at all those things, which goes back to what I said is look at a blood chemistry. First of all, you're familiar with the cell blueprint. That has questions on it that assess people's purpose and social isolation or loneliness or happiness based on validated questionnaires. But if you look at a lab, you look at thyroid, you look at dehydration, which that impacts fat loss. You look at glucose regulation, you look at vitamin and mineral need. You look at their like waste production, creatinine, bilirubin, all that stuff. Just in one simple, it doesn't cost anything lab. And doctors aren't trained to look at those in a nuanced way that you might be able to identify why someone's having a hard time losing weight.
And not only are they not trained to necessarily do that, I think like certainly the fitness professional community, I think has the biggest impact on global health than anybody, because it's become almost fashionable to bash GPs and medical doctors for not explaining nutrition. And while maybe there should be more of a focus on nutritional education, there is also like the biggest problem coaches have is clients adhering to their plans. Doctors see, especially with guys, guys go to the doctor when the lump's already grown, the foot's already fallen off, the leg is gangrenous. Right. So what chance do they have to get people to adhere to programs? They see you once every 10 years. They're putting out a fire. The coaches have this impact. And if they can arm themselves with understanding what the problem is, they have a really massive purpose. But before going to that, I thought that purpose stuff was so interesting. And we said before I came on air, without putting too much of my personal life into the show, I'm currently going through a divorce, and I've gone through big long breakups before. In some ways, I can understand the difference, even just emotionally, of how much you want to do, how much you want to pick yourself up from being immediately thrust into more loneliness. But I know now that I'm dealing with it even subjectively better than I was like 10 years ago when I had this, because my work has become more of a purpose and a drive and a calling than it was before. And it made me think of what you said at the start about your almost order of importance in your life with God coming first. And I don't know if there's any papers on this, but do you see a difference in health outcomes for people who are religious versus people who do not have faith because their purpose is never lived?
So there's a dearth of studies on that. And in fact, I interviewed a guy not long ago who's literally written a book on the subject. It's this massive volume textbook. In general, yes, that it does seem to impact health outcomes to some degree. The question is why, and that's an area that hasn't. At least he didn't really. He didn't. I kind of pushed him on this, and he didn't have a lot of answers, unfortunately. So then you got to go back and look at stuff yourself. I'll put it this way: that they don't know if belonging. So first of all, if you have a certain amount of faith, there's a couple things that might be built in. Number one is you have a purpose. I'm here to serve God every day. It doesn't matter what I do. So if I'm working, I'm serving God, then that's fine. If I'm serving my family, I'm serving God, that's fine. And I say that because some people say, well, and I'm not saying this is bad, but my work is my purpose. Well, what happens if that gets taken away? Did you also lose your purpose? Or is your purpose higher than that? And you're using your work and your work is a means of achieving that higher purpose, right? Because a lot of times people they'll do something. Well, listen, I'll tell you this. This is my humble opinion. You don't buy a book that's like, 7 steps to finding your purpose. I think that's not how that works. It is the thing that drives you to do what you do, whether it's community service, whether it's doing what you do, whether it's raising a family, a big family, or whether it's being single and having a farm. It's like all those people, and I'm talking a high purpose, like I'm here to serve this higher purpose, this higher good. And, my podcast might be as a means to that. Raising my children might be as a means to that, because if all that's taken away, is your purpose taken away, or is your purpose still there? And that will tell you if it's your purpose or not.
And that's why, sorry to cut you off there, but that's why addiction clinics like Alcoholics Anonymous, Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous, they're often very religious focused because they have a higher power that drives people like that to higher success rates than people that come into those programs who maybe don't have faith. They obviously do have success, but there's a common trend.
Yeah, and so that does speak a little bit to your initial question about health outcomes if somebody has some kind of faith. And there's Judaism and Buddhism and Islam and Christianity. There's a whole bunch of different ways. And all those things have been studied, by the way. So I'm not here to tell you like the one true religion is it. But number one is you might belong to a community. And so if you belong to a community, then you don't feel as isolated. You might be going to church, or you might be meditating or praying with your friends, or go to some kind of, Buddhist meditation retreat or something. So the community of like-minded people is kind of built in. Then the other one is potentially this higher thing. So then the question becomes is believing in the thing create better health interventions? So, I want to eat well. I want to exercise because I can better serve my purpose than if I'm, in a bad way, but like a fat slob just sitting around watching reruns of some of your favorite shows on Netflix, which is serving your purpose, And so if you have that higher purpose, you can look at yourself, be like, just sitting around eating a bunch of Doritos, watching reruns of some show on Netflix, that's not serving anybody or anything. So I got to change that. So that's number one. Then the other piece is does having that thing impact your physiology? And the limited studies that are on that suggest that it does, but it's not very concrete. And I'm not going to sit here and make things up and say, believing in something higher than yourself will make you happy and healthy and wise. There is something to it, I'm almost certain, whether it's a neurotransmitter perspective, mental, emotional. So anyhow, that piece is a little bit is vague when it comes to studies.
Incredibly interesting, though. So going into that thing you mentioned, obviously, the first thing you'd recommend a coach do is understanding blood work. And I think for a lot of people, that becomes a little bit of a minefield. It's a very overwhelming topic. There's a lot to look at. Where does a coach start? I mean, obviously, you run course on this, which is a great place to start. But where would a coach start in terms of learning blood work, or even making sure the clients get the right labs?
So again, you actually, I was glad to hear you say this. Put it in a different way. What you said is fitness professionals and coaches are on the front line of the health industry. And you could find some recording of me saying that for the past 10 or 15 years. One of the things I have to say is we must stay in our lane. People must stay in their lane. And I agree with you that people like to bash the GPs. Listen, the GPs should stay in their lane, and their lane is finding disease. Okay? They're not trained to prevent it. They're trained to find it. And then, we're like, well, they should be doing more with nutrition. Not really, because that's a whole other area. So their job is to know about disease, about identifying disease, about treating disease, and knowing a little bit about nutrition so that they can refer to somebody else about nutrition if they need to. They're not supposed to handle that. That's too much. Similarly, a coach, and this is getting to the blood chemistry thing, a coach should know their lane of fitness and then nutrition if they do that as well. And that front lines of the health industry is, bring me your blood work and I'll take a quick look at it for you. Now, the lane is you don't diagnose a darn thing. Not only is that illegal, but it's outside of your wheelhouse mostly. But to know enough that you can skim somebody's labs and say, you know what? I think you need to go back to your doctor. And if your doctor's not listening to you, find another one because your glucose is a little funny or whatever the marker is. It doesn't matter. Your thyroid markers or your AST, ALT, alk-phos, whatever it is. Your bilirubin's high, And you can talk to people in science and research studies without diagnosing anything. Be like, your bilirubin's a little low. According to research, that can indicate that maybe you have too much fat-soluble oxidative stress, or whatever it is, or your kidneys don't look like they're working well. You need to go talk to your doctor. Now, that client loves you not because they got treated by their doctor, because you found it in the first place. They will remember you. They will tell their friends about you. Be like, dude, my trainer took a look at my labs said there was a few things a little abnormal, told me what they were, but I really should take this to a practitioner who's licensed in this, who can deal with this. And oh my gosh, I feel a million times better because that trainer found that. And then the other ladies usually will be sitting, oh, really, can I have his card? Like, tell me about this. You don't diagnose anything. That's not the job. That's the job of somebody else. So, I mean, listen, that's like, to put it another way. And so some people will say, well, no, that's crossing boundaries. No, it's not. Let's say you know a little bit about cars and you hear somebody's car making a funny noise and you know a little bit about it, but not everything. You can be like, you know what? I think that's your whatever alternator is not working or starting up or something. You know, you might want to take that to the mechanic and check it out. Or it looks like your alignment's a little bit off. Whatever it might be, you're not fixing it, but you're telling them that you think something's wrong. You need to go find someone that will tell them what's actually wrong. So that's the job, I think, of a trainer. And so where to learn it, I can say that I'm biased, but I also have a lot of feedback on this. So we do teach a blood chemistry course. The benefit of our course is the beginning of it teaches the physiology of the markers in the first place. So it's not just, which is the reason why I did this, is because the industry had other courses like, here's sodium. If it's high, it's this. If it's low, it's this. And here's the supplements to give. That's trash. It doesn't work that way. I tried it. So what I did was I was like, well, let's teach people what sodium actually is in the blood, what its roles actually are in the body. And therefore, if it's high or low, you can be like, you know what? I bet you it's high because of this, because now I know physiologically how it works in the body in the first place. So I personally highly recommend that people take a good blood chemistry course that teaches the physiology behind it, that doesn't have some bias in terms of, you know, the supplements that are recommended based on highs and lows. I know that ours is, people have laughed at how inexpensive ours is compared to other people's, and we're probably going to raise the price at some point in the future. But that's what I recommend. And it teaches you enough so that you can be that screener, so that you can look at someone's labs, know what it is. Listen, I mean, what if a trainer saw it and was like, dude, you are showing all the signs of dehydration based on your lab? That's a huge finding. Dehydration is associated with like poor glucose regulation. It's associated with, you know, cognitive issues. Like, what a great thing to find. And the little Turgor test, squeezing somebody's skin and seeing how fast it snaps back, that's not even an accurate dehydration marker in the first place. So you can tell so much darn information from a super inexpensive blood chemistry. I have had people that, I mean, like art history majors, you know, in college that decided to be, you know, going to trainer or something, hated science, but they take the course. They're like, man, I love this now. It's so good. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that should be a requisite for all coaches and all trainers, not to diagnose, but to know what you're looking at so that you can find things that the doctors aren't finding and then send somebody to the right person.
And how easy is it? And you talked about earlier on about that's without our scope. And like, yes, you're not diagnosing anything, but if you found out someone is dehydrated, you've got a couple of things. One, that is well within your scope to help people find ways to get the hydration up. They can make massive impact on so many markers. And also, it's data. What I love about data is it's so the objectiveness of it is it. You're trying to convince a client to make a big lifestyle change. We've all seen these people that don't follow any diet. Then they come back saying the doctor tells them they're diabetic and they turn their life around. And I always say to my students, we shouldn't wish diabetes on your client for them to make a change. But if you can go, hey, I've noticed this, and this in the data, and this might be a reason why you're feeling like this, that might be that call to action that sparks change. Absolutely. More than subjectively going, I think you should have 4 liters, and going, well, that seems like hard work.
No, I'll give you a quick example. I mean, there's dozens of things that you can find on a lab, on just a basic lab. So one of the, I'm going to say epidemics, I'll call it a silent epidemic, is fatty liver. Now, I have a whole workshop on this, but it's being missed all the time by both medical and functional medicine practitioners who are solely relying on just a couple markers on a blood chemistry test, AST and ALT. That's usually the ones they'll look at. When you look at, and I cover this in the course, when you look at papers, the inclusion criteria was people with fatty liver diagnosed by ultrasound. and you look at their AST and their ALT, they're usually normal. And so, and I say this because fatty liver, in this workshop that I did, fatty liver is associated with cognitive decline, anxiety, depression, glucose dysregulation. This. In fact, some researchers say it's not just the liver, that it causes kidney problems down the road. That just this thing that starts in the liver, and it's silent, and nobody knows that it's going on. But you can have a trainer or a coach that knows, well, if ALT is a little higher than AST, like that, there's a pretty good chance it might be some kind of fatty liver going on. You could save these people's life 10 years before they get diagnosed with diabetes, and that's a, you said type 2 diabetes is that thing that people are, all right, I'll start taking this seriously now. What if you could find stuff earlier and before that became diabetes?
Yeah.
I'll tell you that if you know what you're looking at on a lab, you can very accurately tell people, listen, if you don't change this, you're heading toward diabetes because of this one marker, this like secret marker that nobody's looking at, right? You are well on your way right now. So you can fix this now and prevent this from ever happening, or you can wait for 10 years until your doctor says you're diabetic, but you're on your way. And that I've found is usually enough to wake people up.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. On that, because I think that's a really, really interesting thing, and talking about the liver and how important it is in so many aspects of people's life. Obviously, if you found this on a blood panel, the first thing you do is to refer out to somebody who understands this a little bit better. Mm-hmm. But from the coach and the fitness professional's perspective, what is in a coach's scope to support the liver, whether it is from a removing things in our lifestyle toxin component, or whether it is, are we getting the right nutrient support detoxification? What can somebody do?
Yeah, well, so detoxification is kind of a different thing entirely. The liver is always described like that's what detox is, but that's not true either. Your skin has all the same enzymes, kidney has all the same enzymes, gut. So, here's what's interesting is I know I just said I hate protocols. The list of interventions that has been shown in human trials. When I mention studies, I stay away from petri dish studies and animal studies, mouse studies. In human clinical trials, the interventions for fatty liver are all nutritional. It's lecithin and things like a quick way to fatty liver is restrict methionine, for example. Vitamin E is massive. One of the conventional doctors know about vitamin E when it comes to fatty liver. I'll just put it that way. So there's a ton. There's actually a ton that they can do. And I will say this again. I for business and legal reasons think we need to stay in our lane. This whole be everything to everybody is just what I think that is, to bring this back full circle. That's people that don't have a purpose. And they feel like they need to be everything to everybody in order to feel like that they actually matter. And so if people find themselves wanting to do that, I'm sorry, I think it's like, no, you reel it back, know who you are in this body, in this world. You got your purpose and your lane. You're good at that and you suck at everything else. And that's totally cool. That's knowing who you are. I mean, knowing who you are and knowing what you suck at and being willing to admit that. You mentioned imposter syndrome earlier. You know why people feel that way? Is because they know they're being an imposter. You don't accidentally feel like that. You know that because you are being an imposter. When you stay in your lane. So I say that because stay in your lane for legal purposes and for your own business, for marketing, for branding. But there's some gray area because let's say, and this is very gray, I'll be honest with you, but is it outside of a coach's purview to use nutrition? Probably not. I think in a lot of places they can use nutrition to some degree. So how is that different than, let's say a client comes in and they say, well, I have high blood pressure. And the coach then looks up scientific literature, scientific papers that are publicly available to everybody that says, whatever nutrient, I'll just say magnesium, something random, or potassium. That says, in this study, 18 people, men with hypertension, were given, there was a control group and there was a study group. The control group didn't do anything. The study group got 500 milligrams of magnesium a day and an extra however many milligrams of potassium. And their blood pressure on average came down, 6 points systolic and 4 points diastolic. I mean, what's stopping a coach from using that paper and saying, listen, hey client, based on this paper, it showed that, this many milligrams of magnesium, this many milligrams of potassium lowered their blood pressure about 5 points on average. What's stopping the client from doing that? That's not diagnosis and that's not treating, as it's using nutrition. So might that coach get in trouble? If they're able to do nutrition, I'd say no, because they're using an evidence-based. And listen, scientific papers, which I just said, if you use human clinical trial papers as your justification, you're not going to get in trouble. You're like, here's the paper. If it was done on mice, or you read it on someone's blog, or you watched a podcast and someone's like, yeah, if you drink your own urine, and that's going to help with X, Y, and Z. But that doesn't, if there's no scientific papers on it, that won't stand up, if someone got in trouble for it. So I'm a huge advocate. This whole, another phrase that's gotten ruined is evidence-based. If somebody wrote about it somewhere from, some small country, one author, not peer-reviewed, well, it's evidence-based. It's not. If you use human clinical trial studies, that backs you up a lot, okay? Because it's publicly accessibly available. So I say that because there's a lot. I use fatty liver, hypertension, glucose dysregulation. If a coach learns how to read, interpret, however you want to say it, a blood chemistry, and there are scientific studies suggesting that certain interventions, like the Mediterranean diet, why can't a coach recommend that? If it's highly studied versus the carnivore diet, there's not as many studies on that. If you use human clinical trial studies and you look at someone's blood chemistry, you can. Listen, your glucose is a little wonky. It looks like you might have some insulin resistance. Here's some papers that suggest the following's intervention that is good for that. Tell you what, let's rerun your labs in 3 months and see if this changes. As long as you're not diagnosing anything or you're not getting outside of your lane, I think that's entirely, like you said, black and white objective data, and watching that improve. I think that, to some degree that's probably okay, as long as you're not being irresponsible or stupid about it.
I think that's the art of coaching as well, right? I often say to my students, our job as coaches is to be, if this is a Harry Potter story, we're Dumbledore, the client is Harry. They're the hero in the story. Ultimately, they pick how they get to their destination. And if you go into coaching with the attitude of look, we're going to brainstorm stuff. I'm going to look at some stuff for you. I'm going to try and guide you the best I can. But ultimately, you choose which path you take. We are not prescribing a supplement or a diet. It's look, based on this might help you. And then the client might go, nope, I hate pills. I ain't taking that magnesium. Yep. Or they might go, do you know what? Yeah, I'll give it a go. And then we assess that and we repeat. And I think at the end of the day, that's the client having autonomy, which is not only better for adherence, because people tend to stick to what they feel they have control over. It also removes this potential legal murky water if I go, here's your meal plan, you must follow this, because you're just giving advice and they can choose whether they take it or not.
1,000%. And again, so if you say there's a study or studies showing that X intervention is helpful for, our observation of what's going on with you, and you present that to them, they're like, really? There's a study on that? And it's on people? Cool. Maybe I'll go ahead and do that then. Instead of just the coach being like, here's my dietary recommendation, but you actually show them why, based on their blood chemistry. You show them the papers showing that there's evidence for this, that you're not just pulling this out of somewhere. That too can increase adherence a lot. But then, like you said, you leave it up to them to do it. But and that's evidence-based. That's what you're doing is not just based off your own whim, what's the hottest, latest trend, but it's actually based off objective data on a lab, not subjective, using scientific principles out of studies. And anyhow, I think that protects trainers and coaches in what they're doing with nutrition.
When it comes to obviously like analyzing blood work and giving recommendations, shall we say, based off this, do you think it's important when someone's looking at studies? You gave this example of somebody finding a study for X, Y, and Z protocol reduces blood pressure. Mm-hmm. Knowing that blood test is everything's almost like this perfectly balanced homeostasis sort of ecosystem, is it important to know the repercussions in terms of the research about spending too long on certain protocols or interventions? I'll give you an example for this. For years, we looked at cholesterol as this correlationing effect with heart disease. Mm-hmm. So you see someone with, a poor lipid panel, high cholesterol, high triglycerides, and a lot of people would be, they would think they were right in trying to drive cholesterol down at all costs. Mm-hmm. But the research also showing that low cholesterol has all sorts of chaos on the body, especially from a steroid hormone perspective. So what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make on a blood panel? And are there other things that people should be aware of in terms of common information that's given out there about drive this down or drive this up that people go, okay, we need to look more closely at this?
That's a good question. I can't think of any marker that I've taught that I've come back around and said, whoops, this was wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think that comes from a deep desire within me to fully question and evaluate everything first. I'm a real slow adopter. I'm not going to lie. I mean, it takes me forever. What you want to know, I actually, we can get into millions of things with this. You brought up toxins before. I'll give you I always think of the counter. I'll just put it this way. When everybody looks left, I usually want to look right because groupthink doesn't really go well very often.
I'm the same.
There are papers, I hate to say it, I wish it weren't true, that show that a certain amount of environmental pollutant exposure is hormetic and it actually strengthens us. So here's this thing like, we're going to die from all these. And I've done a detox program. I promote, our detox program. But, we're going to die. These are all toxins. They're killing us slowly. Well, if you look so again, everybody's looking left, you look right. There's actually studies that suggest that maybe it's, like I said, that a certain amount is hormetic and it actually strengthens us. When it comes to multivitamins, you think that that's the right thing to do, but the studies are not great on that, I will tell you. And from a hormetic perspective, I personally think that all this garbage we're doing to ourselves is making us weaker, less resilient human beings. Like, you are better off being deficient in things for a little while, and your body's like, dude, we got to really dig our heels in or this is going to get bad, versus just popping these pills every single day and all this certain amount. Dehydration is hormetic. Okay, as much as I just said that you want to catch that on people and fix it, it is hormetic. It actually makes you stronger and more likely to survive if you ever do go through some element of dehydration later. Talk about these breathing things and CO2 tolerance. What is that doing? It's a slight stressor to make you stronger. What is sauna? What is cold plunging? It's all the same thing, right? So I say all that to say, when I approach any marker, I want to make sure I don't miss anything. So whereas the collective has said, cholesterol is bad, lower it at all costs, and now, although that still exists, people are like, well, maybe it's not as bad as we realized. Maybe it wasn't the indicator of heart disease that we thought. I'm fully aware that anything I'm saying may be wrong at some point. But I really truly try to evaluate as much on a blood chemist, as much as I can on a marker, so that we don't make those mistakes. I can't think of anything right now. I can tell you where people are wrong. Like I said, waiting for AST and ALT to go up to indicate some kind of fatty liver. That's a super mistake. No, the places that I think that we're wrong is, we like to villainize or demonize things. I personally think that high insulin, for example, is the body's ability or attempt to protect itself. There's some evidence that insulin is anti-inflammatory, maybe antioxidant. People that are super sick in the hospital, the higher their insulin, the more likely they will survive than people that don't. So I think it's that mentality of trying to look at it from the opposite view in making sure that we don't. So I can't think of anything specifically like your example with cholesterol. I'll let you know if I think of some after.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I think that's like really important to be able to one look at the other side of it and just sort of see where, how one thing can affect the other thing. Like I just had this conversation with Carrie Jones a couple of hours ago about toxins, and like, right, people will say our liver is really resilient, we don't need to consider toxins. Mm-hmm. And there were other people, which I also agree with that head shake of yours. We can look at that. But the problem is if we purely just look to evidence, we go X toxin controlling for everything else doesn't have an impact on this. Mm-hmm. But we're not looking at an accumulation of things. And we can't really test for that in research because it would be a bad study because we haven't controlled all the variables.
No, I hate to interrupt you. That's not true. I have over a couple hundred papers I've looked at in this detoxification realm. There are absolutely papers out there. There are 1,000% are papers demonstrating on all animals, going from bacteria to certain mammals, and even to humans, suggesting that low dose has a synergistic effect and negative variables. It also has shown it accumulates. I mean, there's studies on humans on that. That's the thing. People can't say that. That's one area I know a lot about because I've really looked into that. Yes. Which is funny how it started. I will say, I was full tilt, like detox. We're all toxic. We're going to die. And then as these things happen, I was doing some research on it, and a couple of things. One was there was a phase 0, and everybody talks about phase 1 and phase 2, and some people talk about phase 3, but there's a phase 0. And I was like, nobody's ever talked about phase 0 before. How come I haven't heard of this? Which led me to believe we know less than we think we do. The other one was that certain herbs that are found in detox formulas have what's called a biphasic dose response. And what that means is at a low dose simulates detox enzymes, but at a high dose actually inhibits those same detox enzymes. I'm like, what in the heck? Like, we don't know anything about this detox thing. For myself, I got to start from scratch. And so using the scientific literature, answered questions are we exposed? Does it accumulate? If it does, how, when, and where? Can you test these things? If it does accumulate and it causes problems, what can we do about it from again, like a human clinical evidence-based thing? And people say that they don't cause problems is just ignorant. I have over 200 papers just on the topic of detoxification and all the pieces of it. So yes, we are toxic. Yes, it does accumulate. Yes, it causes damage and problems in some people. And yes, there are ways that you can mitigate that using just nutritional principles.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. And then the point I kind of was going on to was it sort of leans into that in the sense of like, that's where coaching comes in, is knowing, okay, we can look at all these papers and go, we are definitely toxic. There is definitely merit into looking at some of this stuff in the same way that we can potentially look at all the impact of the HPA axis and any sort of issues that come from high chronic levels of stress. And we can then kind of go, right, if we understand how both of these things work, I can go, this person is super stressed out. If I start trying to tell them never look at a plastic water bottle again, I changed their whole life, that could cause more harm than the toxins themselves because you've absolutely ramped them up. But if you've got a client that's seeing some of these issues, they've got some of the fundamentals in place, that's the person you then start to go, right, let's start to have this conversation because I do think this would benefit you. And it would benefit the other person too. But that's where the human element of this comes in.
1,000%. I've allowed people to keep smoking because to have them stop would have been too much of a stress. You just have them, maybe you choose a healthier cigarette if there is such a thing, but you know what I'm talking about. Just temporarily, like, this is bad, this is causing problems, but listen, you have other fish to fry. So you just keep on doing that while we work on these things. So, but again, am I advocating smoking? Not even for a second. But as the human element, you definitely have to approach those things.
Slight tangent. But obviously, you spoke about this with detoxing and how like you went back to square one and started looking at the research and formed your own opinion of this. There's going to be a lot of people like listening to this that maybe aren't as prolific at looking at the research, wouldn't know where to start with regards to this.
It's hard. It's very difficult.
How did you go about going, right, I'm going to start with a blank canvas, I'm going to look at the liver. Where did you start to piece together this? Like, if I'm looking at a topic in front of me now, how does Bryan Walsh study?
So listen, people ask that. I don't have an answer for that. I can tell you, I have, So, I mean, going back to my belief system, I think God gives us certain things, and I'm horrible at tons of things, like tons of things in life. But I can tell you that like finding, distilling, and teaching research is just so easy for me, and it always has been. I don't know why. I don't know where that comes from. I have no strategy. I have no system that I could teach. It's just real easy. It's just, and it always has, and I'm super grateful for that. But
as we all are, I can certainly speak from my development as a coach. That I am very grateful for that skill that you have.
Yeah, it's just, I don't know. I people ask like, how do you? I'm like, I have no idea. I don't. I genuinely don't. I get lucky. I feel like
to go into one topic before we close off, and I'll let you get on with your day. For people that maybe you kind of go, I want to kind of learn a little bit more about Bryan. They've really liked this episode, and your entry level product is the Cell Blueprint, which I think is absolutely fantastic. By the way, there is, and as you say in the early videos of that, everyone has a thing. Some people think it's the gut, some people think it's the HPA axis, some people think it's the liver, and everyone's teaching a course.
Yep.
What made you come to the conclusion of cells, and why should people take a closer look at cellular health?
Yeah, this is easy. So I was teaching like a physical class. It was like post college level, I guess you could say. And it was in physiology. And I was looking at, and this is the true story. Chapter 1 of every physiology textbook has this thing called, it's different things, the levels of structural organization or the levels of organization. And so this is a dead true story. So here I was as a practitioner, confused out of my mind, because you go to one seminar on the liver, you're like, all right, I got to work on the liver, and they'll say that the liver impacts brain health, and it impacts gut health, and it impacts your hormones. And if you're not treating the liver, then you suck as a practitioner. I'm like, all right, well, I'm doing the liver. And then like 2 weeks later, you go to a brain seminar, and they're like, well, the brain runs the show. In fact, here's some papers showing that the brain actually runs the liver. And you're like, well, wait a minute. I thought this last week I was taught that the liver ran the brain. And then you could do the same with thyroid. Dude, you could do the same with any system and like call it the thyroid gut axis or the gut brain axis. Dude, and that's the world I lived in. Confused. What do I focus on first? Do I detox somebody or do I work on their thyroid? Or, just that's where I lived. And then I was preparing for the class, and I was looking at the levels of organization. And just to kind of walk you through it slowly, or I should say quickly, I won't take too long on this. But the basic thing is that on and I was just teaching my 14-year-old this last night. We homeschool the periodic table. And so the periodic table is just a bunch of elements, right? You got your halogens and your carbon and your nitrogen and the metals and all these different things. So on the smallest level, like that's what exists in the universe. We can break things down into protons and neutrons, but that's, we're an atom. You put atoms together and you get a molecule. Most people will say H2O, right? You take some hydrogens and some oxygen, you can make water, you make hydrogen peroxide, you can make glucose, you can make an amino acid. Those are all molecules. You take molecules together and you make macromolecules. So amino acids, I could quiz you on this, but I won't put you on the spot. But a bunch of amino acids together is a protein. A bunch of glucose together is glycogen. A fatty acid is a molecule. A triglyceride would be a macromolecule. Okay, it all fits together. And then you take macromolecules at this point, you have some proteins and some fats and some cool carbohydrates, you can make organelles. And these are things like the mitochondria, the Golgi apparatus, the nucleus, the endoplasmic reticulum, all the things that you hear about in high school biology. And then the next thing is if you take a bunch of organelles. So where we went from atoms to molecules, molecules to macromolecules, macromolecules to organelles. Then if you wrap those organelles up in a phospholipid bilayer membrane, you have what's called a cell. And this wasn't in this textbook, but I looked at this and I said, the cell is the first part so far that can sustain life, right? A single-celled bacteria, for example, that when you have all those things, that is life. But here's where it gets interesting, is if you put according to the levels of organization, if you put a bunch of cells together, that makes what's called a tissue. There's only 4 tissues in the body, right? Nervous tissue, connective muscle, and epithelial. If you take a bunch of tissues and you put them together and you get an organ. So what's the heart? The heart has muscle, the heart has neurons, the heart has connective tissue, and the heart has epithelial tissue. Or you could do that with a gut, or you could do it with any organ. Then if you take a bunch of organs that have a similar function as one another, then you get an organ system. So you can take the stomach, that's an organ. But if you plop that with the liver, the pancreas, the small intestine, large intestine, now you have the gastrointestinal system. That's an organ system. And then if you take all these organ systems, respiratory, integumentary, digestive, cardiovascular, nervous, immune, then you get what's called the organism. That's us, right? And so I'm sitting here looking at this. I was like, wait a minute. You're telling me that cells make tissues, tissues make organs, organs make organ systems, and organ systems make an organism. And if a client comes to a coach, they're like, oh, this hurts, or I'm tired, or I'm having a hard time getting pregnant, or I'm having hormonal symptoms. That's the organism is saying that, right? So take a step back. Well, if someone's having senior moments, you're never like, oh, that's your skin, right? Or that's your cardiovascular system. It's the nervous system. But if you take a step back from the nervous system, what is it? It's a bunch of organs. So then you look at the brain. But an organ is really a bunch of tissues. And so I'm going to tell you, it's not the connective tissue in the brain that's probably causing this person to have the senior moments, right? And if you take tissues apart, then you get a cell. What's a cell? Is a neuron. And this is where this dude, this just was like, oh my gosh, I don't need to be an expert in every single condition that someone comes to me. I have hemochromatosis. I'm like, what the heck is hemochromatosis? And you got to look it up, or whatever condition they come in with. Like fundamentally, and just since if you followed what I just said, if you have healthy cells, you therefore have healthy tissues. Mm. If you have healthy tissues, you therefore automatically have healthy organs. And if you have healthy organs, you automatically have healthy organ systems. And if you have healthy organ systems, you have a healthy organism. And I was like, oh, I get chills. I was like, oh my gosh. All I need to do is make sure somebody has healthy cells. And then the next question was, what do you need for a cell to be healthy? And you've watched the cell blueprint, but it boils down to, is it getting the stuff that it needs? Glucose, oxygen, vitamins and minerals. Is it protected from damage, toxins, oxidative stress, infections? And is it the right environment, which is like pH, hydration, and the membranes working well with receptors? That's it. If a cell gets what it needs, if nothing's damaging it, and the environment's right, you have healthy cells. You have healthy cells, you have healthy tissues, you have healthy organs, organ systems, and an organism. And that changed my world. I've been developing that whole idea for the past over a decade probably now. Mm. But I started using that in my practice. Somebody was like, oh, I have diabetes. And I'm like, well, diabetes is a cellular problem. I'm going to tell you. I have an autoimmune condition. All that means is your immune system cells are not working properly. I have PCOS. All right, cool. Your ovaries, which are just a bunch of cells, are making too many androgens. And it all came back to cells. And that changed my life. It simplified my practice. And I'll tell you, I've taught for, I don't know how many years now. I'll ask audiences periodically, be like, what stood out the most so far? And I could be talking about hormones or anything. And people are like, that, what you said of that just is amazing. Yeah. And I didn't make it up. It's in textbooks. But I applied it. And so that continues to be one of our more popular courses because what I just said is it changed my world. It changes people's world. It changes their perspective on patients and clients. It changes their perspective on disease and health. It simplifies things. We have a questionnaire in there that identifies, is it your cortisol or is it your thyroid or is it your gut, upper GI or lower GI, glucose dysregulation. And so I'm humbled by the fact that, so I made that and it worked for me, but the feedback from other people is like, it's unreal. I can't believe I made this because it works so darn well. And that questionnaire usually lines up with labs, it turns out. So once again, I kind of got lucky and, it's a pretty cool course.
I think if there's ever a time where someone can use the word luck and you can use the old adage of hard work meets opportunity. I think that's very much you. You've studied this enough to say this wasn't luck, but I can add to that feedback in terms of how it helped me cut through the noise and refine it into a huge influence in the way I teach coaches. I look at, the way I look at functional nutrition now is I call it like a functional input and output system. And the inputs are cells. And if you can get before you can actually start to look at, and this is what people did, what I used to do is we look at someone with insulin resistance, and we look at blood sugar, and we look at the pancreas. And while that may help, but it might just be the symptom on a root cause of issues. And I could be wasting loads of time and banging my head against the wall. And while I would call this like almost like a functional protocol, in the sense of you don't know the word protocol, but it's more of an order of importance. Right, let's look at getting the foundation.
Yeah.
The pancreas will be pointless if we haven't addressed these things. Let's just, have you still got the symptoms? Yes. Okay. Now let's dive in and look at things a little bit closer. We can look at the brain. How's your stress management? Oh, okay, we're fine. Okay, cool. Now let's look at the liver. Okay, we're cool. Right. Okay, now let's look at what's actually happening when it comes to blood sugar. And it just cuts through that noise. And I think, for me, I know many people that study with you, and I'm sure many people that watch this and kind of follow your work from this and open your eyes to your work will give you that same feedback. So I think it's an excellent course that definitely every coach should look at doing.
Yeah, and I think we're probably up on our time here. One thing I do, if I can, so one of the things that we created is called Clinician's Code. We have a foundation professional certificate program. The Cell Blueprint course is a part of that. The blood chemistry course is a part of that. The fatty liver workshop I was telling you is a part of that. My wife and I worked, so we met in school, this is our business. We created this, it's like a hybrid mentorship program where, there's a community forum. We answer questions on cases and anything people have questions on. There's monthly Q&A calls. We also have a biochemistry course in there too, which doesn't sound great to people, but I've had more trainers. Muscle physiology is biochemistry intracellularly. When you consider, the actin, myosin, and all that stuff is ATP. It's all biochemistry, man. And it's a very eye-opening course. Anyhow, so if there's anybody that really wants to add this to their coaching practice, I'm actually more than ever, because of the information overload that we have, opposed to like the single course kind of mentality. Is I'll just take this course and I'll apply it, instead of getting like the whole system and learning the things that were intentionally put together in order to add and build upon each other, rather than just going to one seminar one weekend and then another seminar the next weekend, and just end up being more confused. So, if anybody really wants to jump headfirst into this, we have that, and that's where we put all of our time and attention. And we've had more people with success stories, and they're applying functional medicine and nutrition to their practice using in that Clinician's Code than anything else. So I just wanted to give that a quick plug if I could.
Yeah, you should absolutely plug that. So I have a closing question before we finalize, go into where can people find you. And I always ask this because I think I've been very fortunate over the last 15 years in the industry to have some amazing people in my network. I had amazing people on this show. And it's so easy for a young coach to look up to these people and go, they're so far ahead of me. And where do we even get to start? So to bring this back and be humble, what is one thing you've changed your mind on? And this could be in your practice, this could be personally, but just what is one thing you've changed your mind on?
Well, so it depends on how far you go back, I guess. I might answer a couple of things on that. When I entered naturopathic school, I had dabbled in the whole functional medicine bit. And when I say that, is functional medicine really means tests. That's what it really is. It's not about the nutrition piece. It's about what cool, expensive, flashy tests can you run. And I was hook, line, and sinker on all these tests, the adrenal salivary test, cortisol test, certain urinary tests, organic acid testing, all this stuff. In that mentorship program I mentioned to you, we have a course called Laboratory Fundamentals. And I basically systematically destroy a lot of those tests because for a whole bunch of reasons. There's that I do not and will not run a bunch of the tests that are very popular in this industry because they are inaccurate. It's a waste of money of my patients. And I think that they don't need to be run. It is. So that's one thing, being blood chemistry is different. So that's one thing that's changed. Similar to that, I think at some point, I absolutely thought diet exercise was enough for somebody to be healthy. I live more now about the purpose. I just got to be honest with you. I think if you know who you really are, I mean, who you are, someone puts a darn gun to your head, and you know it and are willing to die for that, like that's purpose, man. There's no bigger purpose than that. Wow. Like if you know what that is, you're willing to die for it, kind of thing. Like, are you willing to die for your job? You're like, no, I'm selling it. Then it's not that important to you.
Yeah.
How about your kids? You know what I mean? Like that I truly in my heart, I used to think it was, the amount of supplements I used to take, like when I was like 21, it's obscene. I lived down the street from a health food store. I was single. I had my first job ever out of college, and all my money went to supplements. I took everything, you name it. Now, I think it's the dumbest thing you could ever do. I told you multivitamins a couple times a week. You want to get that hormetic effect of maybe not having enough sometimes. So I used to think that was health. I now believe that it's what's happening, and not even in your head. It's not, it's not, are you happy? It's like, do you know who you are and why you're here? And I think that's one of the biggest health metrics, more than anything else. And so that, I guess I've changed my mind on that, because I used to think it was diet, exercise, supplements, but now I think health is knowing who you are, why you're here, and then the rest kind of falls into place.
I love that for so many reasons. One, because I think all good podcasts come full circle, and we've talked about this right at the start, and it's come right back to this. And also, I think it will resonate with a lot of people. And for what I alluded to with my current situation, it's just that nice little wake up call to pick myself up and find my purpose again and find new surroundings and new communities. So it's a nice message for me too. So this has been, I've absolutely loved this. It's been an absolute honor to speak to you after following your work for so many years. If people want to find you, whether it's a clinician's code, cell blueprint, laboratory course, where are people finding Bryan Walsh?
Yeah, so supposedly I'm on social media. I for myself am not. You won't ever catch me on any of those things. I think that they're horrible myself. But there's like some YouTube videos and stuff. Our website is metabolicfitnesspro.com. And that's where you can find my wife and I and all of our offerings, coursework, clinician's code, which again, my wife doesn't like me to say this, but I'm not good at promoting things unless I believe in it. Yeah. And that mentorship program is amazing. It is amazing. We've had hundreds of people at this point go through it. And again, there's so much coursework to learn, but it's like non-biased. It's from the evidence. It's to help make people better practitioners. My wife she crushes business. And so we even offer like business marketing and sales advice within there too. So I encourage people to check it out, because if you really want to if you want to expand your practice and what it is that you're offering people, it's definitely the place to go.
And and you can tell, talking about purpose, you can tell just how excited and animated you were talking about that.
It's true. Says everything. I'm not making any of this up. And again, as like when bring it back, and I'm happy at some point to talk about your atheism, because I used to be, listen, bro, I used to make fun of Christians, like bash, like make fun of the music, everything, like pathetic, weak individual. I'm serious. Mm-hmm. And so I have quite a story about all that. But when that is your thing, when like you love and fear God, you're not going to lie. Like, I'm not going to sit and be like, oh, take clinician's code, it'll change your life. Because like if I'm being dishonest, I got to answer for that, right? So I tell you that to say it has been a game changer for people that have done it. I'm dead serious about it. It's a really, truly, truly good mentorship program, and I would encourage people to take a look at it.
And will the upcoming fat loss course be included in that when it comes out?
So we're in the middle of doing an advanced certificate. We're going to have two. We have a basic one, a foundation one to kind of get, a biochemistry, cell blueprint, blood chemistry, some workshops like, is adrenal fatigue real or not? All about vitamin D, which is a whole other subject. Basically, the short version is don't take it, bad idea, probably. Fatty liver. And then the advanced one is advanced blood chemistry, cardiovascular, thyroid, hormones, detox, advanced glucose regulation. I think that's the bulk of the courses there. So we're dropping that. The weight loss one, we'll go into that one. Although I will say we might sell it separately, because it's pretty unique in terms of the information on that. But anybody
I'm sure from your wife's perspective of the business, knowing how much the weight loss thing will sell, it's probably not a bad idea to do so as well.
It's a very crowded space, though. So how do you come out nowadays and say, like, hey, this is better than the billions of other weight loss programs out there? How do you convince people of that? So we'll see. We're just kind of rolling along.
But it's been an absolute pleasure. I think people certainly will take a lot from this. So thank you so much for your time.
Cool. It was fun.
Thank you.
Thanks.